Hello again.
We're back.
I just blew your ears away from how loud that was. I'm Gary Marco, and
I'm Jason Mahr.
And we're with myfreedomjourney.com. We're trying to teach people how to move forward in their lives and have some personal growth. And I want to start not with a disclaimer, but just as something to consider as we go through this. We're trying to go from a step-by-step pattern, but it doesn't follow a step-by-step pattern when it comes to personal growth. So oftentimes within the podcast, you may see Jason coaching me or vice versa, or we move from an awareness stage to a tool stage really quickly. It's not going to be one podcast is about this tool. Mm-hmm. It's very fluid, so you've got to follow us as we go along. So if you're looking for the full book of recovery, I guess you'll just have to look at all the podcasts.
Right, yeah. Might have to write your own book.
Yeah, that's exactly. Well, maybe you could write a book after you learn the tools that we teach you. Yeah. That would even be greater, I guess.
Yeah, we need to work out a percentage, though.
So today, what we'd really like to talk about is the topic of self-identity. And this is a huge topic, so we're going to dedicate several different podcasts to it so we can cover it. Today's portion of the self-identity piece is going to be giving up comparison. So why don't you take it away,
Comparison
Jason?
is huge. One of the biggest problems in our society. It's really what a lot of advertising is built on. And
yeah.
If you've caught yourself purchasing something that you didn't need,
right,
it's probably, if you pull on that string and follow it, it's attached to you viewing some happy people with that product and comparing yourself with them.
Right.
And feeling like it's the whole FOMO thing. It's the fear of missing out.
Right.
I need to get this particular computer or this particular camera, or if we don't have these things, then we aren't going to be complete. And I can tell you from a ministry standpoint, and I know all the church people that are listening to this right now they're gonna give a big amen, because they deal with this all the time. You can sit around in a staff meeting, and if you spend any time on a church staff, there's going to be a conversation about what's this other church doing.
Right.
What's this other church doing that's getting so many people to attend their church? And you begin to compare what you are doing with what they're doing. And if you try to model, there's some things you can learn from that, but we also know is God puts specific people in certain places to do certain things.
Right. So
we've all got different gifts. We all have different abilities. So if we all tried to be a preacher, what a terrible world we would live in. We'd all just be preaching at each other. And of course, people who speak and people who do leadership stuff, they can, you compare yourself to the best leadership people. You compare yourself to the best speakers or the best people who are getting the most attention. And quite often you'll fall into this state of depression, mm-hmm, because you feel like you can't ever measure up.
Right.
Right. And I remember you were telling me a story about in your golfing experience. We talk about sports. We're sports guys. We like these analogies. And Gary spent a lot of time in the golf world. Tell me a little bit about how this impacted you on the golf course.
Yeah, definitely. And before I get there, I just thought of something as we went through. Comparison is actually something that our brain naturally does for our ego. Mm-hmm. We're always trying to compare ourselves with someone else because it makes us feel better. It's like a function of our brain. Mm-hmm. It's really being able to turn that function off is what we're talking about. Because this sort of stuff happens all the time. It happens all the time. This person's prettier, this person's wealthier, whatever, mm-hmm, it is. It's a way for us to make decisions.
Right.
So it's having the ability to turn that comparison tool off is what the key we're talking about when it comes to giving up comparison. So as a golfer, there's always someone that's going to be a better golfer. So mm-hmm, when I tried to play professional golf, probably the biggest thing I struggled with was comparing myself to other people's games. Now, I probably was better than 90% of the guys that I played with, but I always seemed to play with the 10% that were better. And if they hit the ball farther, or straighter, or had a particular ball flight, or had a really good short game, I was always comparing my game to theirs, and I never measured up. I never measured up. Instead of just playing my own game, I never measured up. So when you get to that mindset, you start getting really tough on yourself. So when I would hit a bad shot, it would be more destructive to me than it would be for someone else. And I thought back about it, and it was something both my parents struggled with greatly, that they were always comparing themselves to other people. That led to my father telling outrageous lies about his career and how successful he was, when he wasn't very successful at all from a material perspective. And the same thing going on with my mom quite a bit, about making sure that the other women in the neighborhood felt like she was a good mom. So it was almost like a modeled behavior that I took on and owned as I grew older. That's no excuse. That's kind of the source of where it showed up. But I think this is something we all struggle with to some degree.
Yeah, and I spent a lot of time in youth ministry.
Yeah.
And I'm currently, to this day, still do a lot of youth ministry. And I see in the younger generation, especially coming up, there's record amounts of depression.
Right.
There's record amounts of people being on antidepressants. They're medicated. You're not going to find a high school where, the nurse is busy.
Yeah.
Managing all of these prescriptions and all the things that students are doing today just to cope.
Right.
So it's funny, and there's no, what I'm going to share with you is not scientific. Okay, we're not.
Right.
This is just a hunch.
Right.
All right, and I think it's funny that we see a rise in depression the more access that students have to social media.
Right.
And the reason is because, and we all do this, okay, which FYI, when Facebook came out, it was for college students. It was created for college students to connect with one another, if you know the history of Facebook. And then all the parents jumped on, and all the teenagers went to Snapchat and Instagram. They jumped ship because they don't want to be hanging out where their parents are hanging out. But we do it. We all will sit there. If you've got it on your phone, you'll sit there and scroll. And just, again, we talked about journaling the last podcast. You do a mental journal here and think about how many times you scroll through your device, you view an image, and you compare yourself to the person that you see in the image.
Yeah.
And I can tell you this, any time that you compare yourself to somebody else, you will always lose.
Right.
You always lose.
Because you're always going to find some reason to move that person higher than yourself.
And so, of course, in the summertime, you're scrolling through, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat, there's always going to be that family who's on the beach with all their white shirts on. They're dressed up in their white button-up shirts, and they all look so happy. But you do not see what's going on inside the home.
Right.
I mean, I've literally met with the husband and the wife in the pictures who are on the verge of divorce because the husband's addicted to pornography, or the wife's had an affair, or they're in a financial crisis. Some of the things that we compare ourselves to and we want, if we actually had them, we would realize we didn't want them in the first place.
Right. Or didn't need them.
Yeah, we didn't need them. So when we compare ourselves to other people, and again, we're training, the social media trap is huge. We're training our brain, literally training our brains to compare.
Right.
Constantly.
Well, and think about the whole big subject of bullying. And if you think about the subject, it's actually people stuck in the rut of comparison. So they're either they're judging, making fun of someone else because we're better than them, or vice versa, and it's just constant. And when I was a kid, the bullying showed up at school, maybe in the neighborhood when you're walking around, depending on your parents, maybe when you got home. But nowadays with social media, it is so much worse, because not only can people get bullied 24/7, but the audience is so much bigger. So the impact is so much greater to the person.
Yeah, and I wish for the days, I long for the days back in the 1980s when I was growing up. It's probably the 1940s or 50s for you. When I was growing up in the 80s, I remember growing up in Southern California, and as a kid coming up through the elementary school system, you're constantly comparing yourself with other people. And I remember being in 6th grade, and some of my friends may see this and remember this story. The guys are all out playing basketball. I wasn't totally athletic yet at that point, but I wanted to be around those people because that's where the girls were.
Right.
Right. So what I did was I positioned myself up against the basketball pole. I was just leaning back against it, and guys are all playing basketball, and I'm focused on this group of girls over here. I'm checking them out, I'm making sure they're looking at me because I'm hanging out with the basketball guys. But while I'm looking at them, little do I know there's a basketball headed towards my head. One of those great basketball players misses the shot. It hits me in the head. My head hits the pole. I get all out of control. I get all dizzy. I take a few steps back, and I lean up against the school building. Now, if you're from Southern California, you go to school outside. Most high school campuses around here, it's all indoors.
Yeah.
Well, they had buildings all over the place, and you'd walk outside. So I bumped up against this little modular building, and I slid down. And when I slid down, my pants caught a nail. And ripped my pants like right up the butt crack, just totally ripped wide open. Now, if we would have had social media back then, they would have all had their phones out. They would have all been on Snapchat, and it would have been all around the world in just a matter of seconds.
Yeah.
So I'm thankful for those. But again, the comparison problem literally ripped my pants open.
Yeah. So now that we've really identified this, hey, you've got to figure out some way of giving up comparison, we should probably tell the audience some of the ways to do it.
Yeah.
For me, the comparison, it's almost like you have to understand who you are as a person. Mm-hmm. I really had to understand the mode of comparison that I got in was I'm someone that really cares about other people, and I want to give to others. I want to have an impact in the world. But there was a long period of my life where I was worried about how much money I made, the title of my job, what I had in the parking lot, right? Mm-hmm. What house I had, what clothes I had, what type of arm candy I had on my elbow. I mean, all that stuff became so important to me that I really lost who I was in the mix. And it was a lot of stress on me, and it was exhausting trying to live as someone that I really wasn't. Mm-hmm. So part of this process of giving up comparison is, hey, you've really got to understand who you are as a person, and then stay true to yourself as a person. Mm-hmm. There's still a possibility that you can compare yourself within that.
Yeah.
I mean, Jason's a giving person, so am I, and all of a sudden now I may be comparing myself with Jason, but at least that kind of eliminates some of the junk that you can get yourself involved with. So that, for me, that might be the first step to take. How about you?
Well, I think, to me, it goes to DNA.
Yeah.
If you just think about DNA.
Okay.
Right? When there's a murder, when there's some sort of mystery, they look for DNA.
Right.
Because DNA will signal out one person.
Right.
And what's amazing about that is every single person has different DNA.
Right.
Which really what it tells us is that we're all created differently. Mm-hmm. We're all different. Congratulations, you're different just like everybody else. That's what the saying goes.
Okay.
You're different just like everybody else. But there is, one thing for me is there's nobody like me.
Right.
Nobody like me. And I'm sure that there's people that would compare themselves to me. There's nobody like me. There's nobody like you. You have been created with purpose to do exactly what you're doing because there is nobody like you. And if you were meant to be like everybody else, then you'd be created to be just like everybody else. We'd be sharing DNA.
Right.
But we're not. We have our own individual DNA because you are one person that will never be replicated again.
Right.
And when you think about that, it helps alleviate the stress of, am I supposed to look like this movie star? Am I supposed to act like? No, you're not. but you can own your own space. You can be successful in what you are doing, and have a very extremely fulfilling life, knowing that that's exactly what you were created for.
And it also makes me remember, experiences within a family. You could have 4 kids experience the same thing in a family, but they'll all put their different spin on it. They'll see things in a different way. They'll interpret things in a different way. And thus, the experience is going to be different for those 4 kids than any one of the other kids. So even if you had 4 clones in a room watching the same movie or the same situation, they're going to come up with a different reality for their experience.
Right.
And therefore, they're all going to be different. So it's almost like comparison, it's just not necessary. Now, some people use it as from a competitive nature. I guess in some cases it would make sense.
Yeah.
If I'm going to get better at something, maybe if I pick someone that's better than me and compare to see what the difference is, that it would help me improve. But if I don't improve, that's no reason to beat myself up for not being able to do that either.
Yeah.
I mean, no one's going to be as good a basketball player, I don't know, as Michael Jordan as an example. Well, okay, had unique skills and abilities, but I guess you see my point there. But it's more from the destructive perspective that
because we wouldn't necessarily
about
call that comparison. We'd call it education.
Right.
If you're studying something else, or if you're trying to develop a product, you want to look at what else is going on. But what we're talking about is from an identity standpoint,
Right?
Because you can lose yourself in trying to be somebody else. And so I think one really practical tool as we wrap this up that I think everybody can do, because most people are connected with social media in some way, is to filter through that. And you may have to take a break from social media just hit the pause button on it for a little while, so that you can recover some sense of identity in your life. Because if you feel like any time that you've got free time, you got to pick up your phone and start scrolling through social media, you have an identity crisis. You really do.
Right.
Because it's training your brain to compare with other people. So you may need to take a break from that, and you'll find your brain actually recovers and heals, and you're able to see the world for what it's meant to be. Awesome. So that's the first step in identity, is getting over the comparison trap, and we will uncover more stuff as we go on. So my name is Jason Mahr.
And Gary Marco.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Take care.